Hello and welcome to this session today, curated by IABM, entitled Charting the Uncharted, Exploring New Technologies and Business Models in Broadcast and Media Industry. Now this session will look at the challenges and opportunities in this new media ecosystem. And shortly I'll be joined by a fantastic panel who will be discussing these issues further. But before that, we are going to take a look at IABM's latest research and analysis on the current state of the broadcast and media, and how its future is likely to unfold over the coming months and years. So I'm pleased to be joined by IABM's Head of Insight and Analysis, Lorenzo Zanni, to talk about IABM research and our most recent Charting the Uncharted reports. Lorenzo, can you just give us a bit of background about how the report was produced?
Thanks, Lisa. Yes, of course. So let me pull up a slide. So the research from this report comes from a variety of sources, including interviews we regularly carry out with media companies and technology suppliers. And also we've done 2 surveys during this period. One straight after the start of the coronavirus pandemic, which is our coronavirus impact tracker, which was designed to chart the impact of the pandemic on the media technology industry. And also in August, we launched our MediaTech business tracker, which is a survey on media technology strategy and media technology purchasing behavior. So we try to use both surveys and interviews we regularly carry out with media companies to understand where the market is going.
Excellent. And I see that you've got the link for the report in that slide there. Now, Lorenzo, which were the most important drivers of change in the media technology industry you identified, and how were these impacted by COVID-19?
Yeah, so in terms of the most important drivers of change, we've done a big round of interviews between March and April 2020. And we try to identify the long-term drivers of change in the industry, in the media technology industry, which are reported on this diagram. As you can see, the most important drivers of change in the industry is direct-to-consumer, which is changing the fundamentals of the industry. And we've also identified 4 others drivers of change, which are the move towards service models, the increased propensity of media companies to insource technology development, the propensity to see technology as an enabler of business objectives, as well as the emergence of new generations of media technology professionals in the media industry. And we do think also by interviews we carry out after this big research project that all these drivers of change have been accelerated by the coronavirus pandemic, and particularly, as everyone knows, direct-to-consumer consumption by consumers who, particularly at the start of the pandemic, were locked down at home. So they accelerated that move on their side.
Okay, that's really interesting. Just going back to one of your points, why is technology being considered only as an enabler of business objectives?
So we think that technology was considered as an enabler of business objective even before the start of the coronavirus pandemic. So media companies are very much focused on technology that enables them to achieve specific business objectives. These business objectives, in a lot of cases, are about saving money or about gaining increasing efficiencies, but they could also be about spending more money to unlock new revenue opportunities or to achieve new creative solutions. But there is not anymore the view of technology as something nice to have, but rather as something that needs to be linked to a specific business objective. As you can see from this slide, you've got the most important priorities in technology roadmaps, and the ones at the top that I've tried to highlight are connected, I think, to specific business objectives. You've got cloud and virtualization and at home and remote production that were very much accelerated by this pandemic as media companies had to ensure business continuity. And you've got IP network in there, which is important as the fourth most important priority. But I want to focus as well on OTT and streaming platforms, because we talked about direct to consumer. And as you can see, those are the most important trends in at the end of the content supply chain. So we're in publish, monetize, and consume.
Okay, so how has COVID-19 influenced this industry paradigm?
Yeah, so in terms of the impact of COVID-19, let me go to this slide. And let's go back to the segments we talked about before. So publish, consume, and monetize. So as you can see, from a supplier's perspective, the industry is decreasing in terms of revenues, although there has been an asymmetric impact because the start of the content supply chain has been much more hit than the end of the content supply chain. So you've got, for example, create and produce, which have been hit by the cancellations of event and the shutdowns in productions. While as you go closer to consumer, we think the impact has been less heavy. From a buyer's perspective, you've got a similar trend, although it's not the same. But you can see that consumer is the most important part of the content supply chain for buyers in terms of investment and future investment. They're very much focused also from this trend on basically direct to consumer platforms, as we said at the beginning. And also, I wanted to share another slide to go a little bit in more detail on the specific activities. So as you can see, and as we discussed, basically the start of the content supply chain has been very much hit, and there has been a focus on enabling remote production and on moving to decentralized production models, while in the middle of the content supply chain, media companies have focused on things like digital archiving to basically leverage existing content assets, as well as deploying infrastructure, the infrastructure needed to enable remote working. At the end of the content supply chain, and we focus very much on that, there's been a shift when it comes to traditional and new distribution model with an increased focus on internet distribution. Ad tech spending has suffered, although according to our research, it remains a mission critical area for media organization. And media companies have also focused more on data analytics and personalization, which is consistent with the accelerated move to direct-to-consumer platforms.
Okay, and when we started, you talked about the transition to as-a-service models the industry is going through. Are you able to expand on that a little bit?
Yes, so in terms of the transition to as-a-service models, basically, according to a variety of data points from our service that we gather, this transition has also been accelerated by the coronavirus pandemic out of necessity. In fact, as you can see from this chart, most buyers report increasing investment in cloud computing and software subscriptions, indicating an accelerated move to this model. And also on the supply side, as you can see from the quote from Ken Gyron from Avid, major media technology suppliers such as Avid and Harmonic highlighted this demand shock in recent earnings calls, pointing to an increased demand in their as-a-service offerings and a more pronounced decline in their legacy products. In fact, according to our research, hardware revenues, not surprisingly, have suffered much more than software revenues, more than double. And even software revenues have shown a mixed picture with subscriptions doing well and permanent licenses declining more significantly, which is partially shown by this chart.
Okay. And finally, can you tell us about the status of the transition to the cloud?
Yes. So if we go a little bit deeper in this part of this as a service models transition, we can see that yes, the cloud is accelerating, and we found this from our data with more companies adopting cloud-based operating models. But the transition to the cloud is not a straightforward one. As you can see, from a deployment perspective, is not all about public cloud. Most media companies are interested in hybrid models. Also, there are some different stages of deployment of the cloud in different parts of the content supply chain. For example, according to our data, the most important one is manage. And there are a lot of challenges as well. And we've seen, we talked a lot about a lot of them in this period. But the most important ones are the economics of the cloud. So the cloud remains more expensive in different applications. A lot of companies are still concerned about security. So this may be again a cultural challenge for the media industry still, and again the lack of long-term vision and context as well. So it's a complex deployment, even if it seems that the cloud is always rising and things are easy. It's not actually an easy transition, and there are still a lot of issues that the industry needs to resolve when it comes to cloud-based deployments.
Excellent. I know you've done a dedicated report on the cloud, and that's available on the IABM website, isn't it?
Yes, that's available on the IABM website, and in the report we try to talk much more about these specific things in terms of the adoption of the cloud. Excellent.
Thanks, Lorenzo. That was a really good oversight of the report.
Thank you.
Thanks so much, Lorenzo, for that insight. Just to highlight, the extracts from Lorenzo's presentation can be found on the IABM website. And of course, IABM members are able to delve deeper into some of these findings via their exclusive access as part of their membership benefit package. Now, onto our panel. I'm pleased to be joined by a great lineup today. We have Andrew Hingbold, who's CEO at Singular.tv, Darren Lepke, who's Head of Video Product Management at Verizon Media, Jax Edouard Guillemot, who's SVP at Nagra, and John Vimarche, who's MD APAC at Meteogenix. Welcome, everybody. So on to my first question. Can I just ask you to tell us about your organisation and the structure of your business models you have there?
After over 20 years of working in traditional broadcast, it became apparent that the tools that were available weren't meeting the needs of modern content creators. The streamers and the digital-first content creators didn't use a lot of traditional SDI workflows. So we recognized that there was an opportunity to take our experience from decades in traditional broadcast and create an entirely new platform, which is what we did with Singular.live, creating a cloud-based solution that allowed people to easily create dynamic overlays quickly and easily, all in a web browser. There's no dedicated hardware nor software. It all works in a browser. And by creating an easy to use setup model, we recognized there was a much larger audience out there that could use these tools to create their content.
Working for Meteogenix, and I'm heading the APAC region. And Meteogenix is a one product company providing a content supply chain management solution. So it's a mouthful, but we are key in everything which is related to content management, scheduling, linear and non-linear, media, rights, contracts, EPG. So making sure that you can actually deliver your video from ID to actually the operations, you know, the publication part. Actually, we're providing a software solution for the media companies, whether they are broadcasters, commercial public, OTT providers, pay TV companies and telcos. So every media company that is actually delivering video.
I work in a group called the Media Platform. We're a part of Verizon Media. Verizon Media and our media platform team is a B2B service provider. We offer end-to-end OTT streaming services for broadcasters, sports leagues, and other content publishers around the world. Some of our biggest customers include folks like ESPN, Discovery, and Fox. So what we do is we take linear channels, live events, or on-demand content, and we bring it to the cloud. We prepare for distribution, and then we deliver it over the top to mobile devices, connected TVs, browsers, laptops, anywhere around the world.
So I'm a member of the executive board of Nagra, and I'm in charge of Nagra Insight. So Nagra Insight is our business performance platform that is using data and artificial intelligence to help operators develop and grow their business. So our business model is really subscription-based. Insight is organized around modules that address specific business issues like the acquisition, the retention, the content purchasing, etc. And so we operators can subscribe to these modules on a yearly basis to use our platform.
IABM researchers talked about the transition from broadcast dollars into those digital pennies to illustrate the thinner margins of direct consumer businesses. From your perspective, what is the secret recipe to make money in this new digital world? Does it largely depend on the adoption of a clear and specific business model?
And we spoke about that earlier. When you look at traditional broadcast, it was very capital intensive and the timelines were much longer, months necessary to set up live events. So in this digital transition, the budgets are a lot smaller and the timeframes are much smaller. So with Singular, what we focused on was creating a tool that could be easily set up, but we recognized that if we were able to make it cost effective and easier to use, that there'd be a much larger audience. So not just the high-end broadcast content creators that created these SDI that have these great studios, but a whole army of streaming content creators that were out there. So we created the tools knowing that we would have to charge significantly less, but there would be many, many more out there that could use these tools to create their content.
It's already a question that goes in a certain direction when you say, okay, the digital space is pennies. If I look at the Googles, Facebooks, Alibabas and Tencents of these worlds, I don't think they make pennies. So it's depending on where you're standing. So these platform companies, they do make a lot of money, but indeed, let's say the other media companies are indeed in that space where it's not easy to make money in the digital space. So how can they make more money in this digital space? I would see or discuss with them whether they can get a higher revenue share from these platform companies, because actually these platforms companies are making money, but I guess not sharing too much back to the content producers, content providers. So maybe there's something that can be done by these companies to rediscuss or to reassess the revenue sharing part. That's one thing. Of course, I think another important component is content theft. I think content theft is really an issue, because in the end, when you spend money on producing, creating content, you would like to monetize it. And if people are just watching your content without paying anything for it, that's not serving the business model. So I would say work with the Googles and the Facebooks of this world and try to get a more fair share of the revenues that are generated in this space. And secondly, see whether content theft can be tackled as well.
That's a great question. So if if there was a secret recipe for making money, I probably would keep it to myself and start a consulting business. The answer is there is no secret recipe, right? I think we're still early days in terms of the rollout of OTT. You have to remember that the television business has been around for over 70 years now. OTT as a real business has really been around for about 5. So it's still very nascent, still very early. And what we're seeing is the folks who are successful are the ones who are willing to experiment a little bit with their business model. You know, there's certainly some lessons to be learned from the television industry and the pay TV industry. Multiple revenue streams are always a good thing, as we saw with pay TV, where you have both subscriber revenue and advertising revenue. I think with the world of digital, there are additional potential revenue sources beyond that, because of the fact you're on a connected device, you know, with a web browser, which enables you to do, you know, additional money generating activities through additional sponsorships or potential commerce opportunities. So I think the answer is there isn't an actual secret recipe these days. We're still learning. We'll still see experimentation with different kinds of services. You know, there still is, you know, the obligations of the television industry and licensing that will continue to influence that. But I think if we ask this question again in 5 to 10 years, it'll be a completely different world in terms of what's possible for generating revenue in the direct-to-consumer business.
Especially in media and entertainment, you know, what's important is to bring back the customer at the center of the thinking. You know, because the question is, you know, for our customers, how do I spend my spare time? You know, and you have to make sure that they spend their spare time with your service. And it's all about customer intimacy. You know, it's all about having a service that is relevant to the subscriber or to your targeted subscriber. So I think really it's first thinking about the offering, about the relevance of your offering, and then only then comes the business model, because we have seen a lot of different business models. And I would say that when a customer when an offering is sticky to a customer, you know, you can charge, I will not say whatever you want, but you can charge with a premium, with the business model that you think is the most appropriate, because the customer will purchase a relevant service.
That's great, thank you. And on to the next question. Before the pandemic, we talked about the growth of AVOD with the launch of some major offerings by large and international players. One of the major effects of the pandemic has been the immense pressure on advertising revenues. Do you think this shock has been common across the board, or have budgets migrated away from linear towards streaming?
We have seen budgets change and different types of content being created. The monetization isn't exactly where we fit into this. See, with Singular, we can enhance any type of content. We see a huge proliferation in a variety of content, just in general, people creating secondary feeds for their primary broadcasts and a much more shoulder programming to enhance their feeds, and just individuals in their house creating content. So when we created Singular, we created that so all these content creators can use that. There's been such a focus on people just moving content from point A to point B, just the streaming nature of it. The content's getting higher resolution, the video screens are getting smaller on our smaller devices. Certainly it's a lot more convenient to work on it, but at the end, it's largely the same passive experience. So we looked at creating Singular is how do you augment or enhance that experience? In some capacity, we said, well, what if you now have an international distribution platform on any of these social media platforms? What could you do differently? So we focus on things like language localization and sponsorship, where instead of creating one feed in one language, you could create 20 feeds in 20 different languages simply by scaling it in the cloud. So there's no impact on the end user. And that's what we refer to as our on-stream offering, when you're burning graphics or these overlays into the feeds. So if you're going to do it in one language, it's very easy to do it in multiple languages with multiple sponsorships if necessary. But we didn't stop there. We looked at all this content that was being created and said, well, instead of just creating these feeds that are delivered to one user, just moving the video from point A to point B, what if we were able to take these overlays, these intelligent overlays, and render them on the end user's devices? What would be possible then? And we looked at personalization, user engagement, interactivity. in addition to things like language localization and sponsorship. So we built that into what we refer to as our on-device offering, where these interactive overlays can be rendered right within the player, allowing people to have a truly interactive, engaging experience. So think about this. Instead of one feed going to hundreds of thousands of users, that experience is actually being rendered on hundreds of thousands of users and device. Each person has a totally bespoke, customized, personalized experience. So we think that's amazing. For us, it's finally a game changer where you can deliver on the true promise of interactive television. And that ties into our third offering, which is what we refer to as on demand. There are huge VOD libraries out there. You know, live streaming is certainly very important and drives a lot of monetization, but once those assets are recorded and done, how do you enhance those? So we tied Singular in so you can make your overlays tie into these VOD assets where you can change them afterwards if there's different sponsorships, different language, different features you wanted. A perfect example might be watching a international football match. And at the end of it, this football match might be from a year or two ago. At the end of it, it was, let's just say, England, USA, for example. And at the end of it, it could tell you when the next English match is for you, because you're over in the UK, and over here in the US, it would tell me when the next US international friendly is, and it would tie into data. So they could be dynamic overlays fed by data servers in the cloud. And it could also have calls to action with promo codes and e-commerce opportunities. So all of a sudden, these VOD libraries have a whole nother layer. We can breathe life into them to make them more valuable and more engaging for people that are interested in watching the content. So we think there's just huge opportunities to enhance all the content that's being created in general.
First of all, the migration to non-linear or to on-demand or to OTT, as a different word for the same thing, that's already ongoing, I would say, for the last at least 5 years. Of course, it's now at a higher scale, but not because of COVID. I think it was accelerating already pre-COVID. So that's, for me, the COVID didn't change anything. Of course, what happened with COVID is that there is indeed some companies really feel pressure on advertising revenue, because advertisers are more careful because, yeah, economical situation is not the same as pre-COVID times. But again, there you see, I would say, two different worlds. I'm not so sure that, again, these big platform operators suffer from advertising money. It's again the other companies, the more you could say the traditional, the old kids on the block, not the new kids on the block. They do suffer, and how to solve that conundrum. I think, again, I'm referring to my answer to the first question, is if the Googles and the Facebooks and the Tencents and Alibabas are not suffering, can the business model be made a bit more fair, and can there be a better revenue share? Because it's not only about advertising money, but the second big thing and problem that I see between the platform operators and I would say the traditional companies is that they actually also provide all the audience data to these platforms, and we know it's the new goal. So there, I would almost say, lose on two fronts: on the audience data front and on the advertising front, because it's being eaten away by the platform companies.
The pandemic has certainly had a tough effect on the advertising industry across the board, whether we're talking about television advertising or digital advertising. What we're seeing here, at least in the US with our business, has been a V-shaped graph. We saw kind of the business fall off a cliff in February and March, around that time frame, as advertisers pulled back on their spending. They realized that consumers weren't buying a lot of high value items like cars or other things. So we really saw a strong pushback or a pullback in budgets, as we're just trying to figure out what the new world will look like under this pandemic. I think probably around midsummer, June, July, we started to see a very healthy recovery in that spend as life returned to the new normal wherever we are today. And certainly one of the fastest growing areas where we've seen investment has been in OTT and connected TV. I think we're seeing a change in viewing habits where folks are at home, they're budget conscious, so they may be cutting the cord and kind of picking and choosing OTT services that they like. Brands and advertisers realize that one of the best ways to reach people is on their OTT and connected TV services. So for us, that's one of our core offerings at Verizon Media. We do a lot of server-side ad insertion for our broadcast customers. We pair that with some of the ad platforms offerings from our partners over on the other side of Verizon Media. And for us, we at this point have seen a return to normal and even growth beyond where we were back in February and March before this all started.
What we have seen, and this research is completely right, what we have seen is a stretch in terms of advertising revenue, and it's simple. From the companies that were advertising, it's completely understandable, to reduce the risk and to not overspend in terms of advertising. So I think, yes, there is this reduction of advertising, but I would not say that there is a change in the shift, because we always put digital advertising and targeted advertising on the forefront, but there is this other type of advertising around the reach, to make sure that a maximum of people see your advertising. And this can not only be brought by digital, but also by other way of advertising that is extremely important to make sure that you build the awareness. So I haven't seen a big difference in terms of mix of the advertising dollar that is spent.
This crisis has confirmed the strength of the subscription model, both on the demand and supply side of media technology. In terms of using subscription technology solutions to analyze data, for instance, have you seen any specific developments in this period?
This is exactly why we made Singular a SaaS model, because we recognized these content creators didn't have the time or the capital budgets required to set up traditional workflow. And in fact, the SaaS model really complements modern content creators in general. So we noticed a huge opportunity to allow people to quickly get up and running with a system. So we've seen not only people like Singular, but other service providers out there using this same type of model that allow content creators to keep their overhead low and quickly get their product out to air and react more dynamically, which is necessary in this new era of content creation.
It is, let's say, clear, and that started pre-COVID as well, but again, maybe a bit accelerated. It's clear that audience analytics is the new gold. And well, if I would tell this to a Google or Facebook, they would be laughing in my face, because they knew it maybe 5 years ago or 10 years ago. And so but you clearly see a trend now that, let's say, across the board now, companies realize that data is important, is the new gold, and that you have to personalize your experience. And so you see a lot of companies, and not only the big platform operators, investing and trying to discover what could work, what doesn't work, what kind of solutions do we need to build up such a, let's say, audience data platform. How can we make recommendation better, etc., etc. So that's a clear yes, that you see an intake or an onboarding of these solutions, or an increased awareness in this area.
Subscriptions continue to be a key source of revenue for OTT service providers. I think we are seeing some creativity in the use of subscriptions, where traditionally you would be, month over month, you're getting charged for a service, and that certainly is still the case for a lot of the large providers. What we're seeing now is perhaps some smaller subscription windows to perhaps cover a particular event. Say a large sporting event that spans multiple weeks. So we see particular packages that are being rolled out for smaller events on one end, and on the other end, we're seeing a big push to get consumers to subscribe on a yearly basis in order, at a great discount, right? It's an incentive for folks who know they're going to be on the service for a long time. If they're willing to pay upfront for an entire year, you can see significant discounts, up to almost 50%. So in the subscription arena, I wouldn't say there's a ton of technical experimentation, but certainly from a business model perspective, we see a lot of service providers who are trying to experiment with different ways to ultimately keep subscribers interested in their service and find a way to lock them in over a long time.
We see is a stress on the organizations. That comes because there is a stress on the revenues, and so there is a question marks on the costs. You know, and what's important in this time of big questioning is to bring back facts to the table, you know, and to have data and to have analysis and to have also predictions and recommendations on what to do next, on what's the best move. And so I think everything or every technology, like I would say Nagra Insight, that helps to increase the business performance, and that is directly linked to the bottom line in terms of impact, you know, has seen a tremendous increase in demand during this pandemic.
So IABM research has also talked about sectoral polarization, with large digital platforms gaining more from the pandemic-induced lockdowns compared to traditional players in the industry. Now, in streaming, how can smaller players achieve effective differentiation compared to large and deep-pocketed content supermarkets, such as the Netflix and the Amazon Primes of this world?
This is similar to a question before. Any of the content that's being created can be enhanced with Singular, but if you use some of the bigger players, they have bespoke solutions, so you only get to use the capabilities that they offer. Singular, anyone can use. So not only are these smaller content creators creating the content they want for their audience, they can use Singular to engage their audience in the way they prefer to engage them. What type of interactivity, what kind of overlays and interactions. So it's taking the capabilities that some of these larger players have and giving all the tools and more to all the other content creators to let them take control rather than just handing their content over to a third party to distribute it and let them do what they will with the content. This is really, our goal is to actually help all content creators create the experience they would like with their content.
What I think, but that's a personal opinion maybe more, is that local players have really the benefit of being on the ground, feeling the pulse of a country or a community. And while I know that in a globalized world, people tend to also like the local aspects, because, you know, you have then to balance a bit. Every person kind of likes to balance more global, but also more local. And so these companies can offer local, relevant, grounded content. And I think that's where they have to bet on, according to me, because these global players, they will tend to go for formats, and they do some localization, so I will not deny it, but the localization is still with a bit of a commercial background, in the sense that we localize it, but we still hope that that localized content will have a global impact. So they look for local that still can have a global impact, which is, I would say, completely different from then the local media companies that they don't need to care whether they have a global impact, and if it does, the better, but the focus can be on the local grounded content.
You know, to compete with the big players, the first place you start is with the content. You know, even with deep pockets, we've seen that, you know, without a hit TV show or without a, you know, piece of content that really resonates with viewers, you're not guaranteed success. You know, Quibi here in the US is a great example of that, where they, you know, have a huge content lineup. They have, you know, a lot of investment. They have a lot of advertisers signed up, but you know, still not gaining traction despite the deep pockets. So for any service, I think the answer is, you know, finding content that's relevant to your audience. Knowing your audience is key to that. You have to understand what kind of viewer you're trying to attract, what kind of content they like and they prefer, and then tailoring that to their experience. Beyond that, the core aspects of any OTT service, you know, start to come into play. You have to deliver the video at high quality. The user experience has to be simple and straightforward, easy to navigate, easy to find that content that you like. and it has to be available on any device. You know, we've seen some challenges with other services that haven't launched on popular connected TV devices or on certain mobile devices due to whatever reason, lack of technical capability, or perhaps, you know, lack of agreement with that device manufacturer. But, you know, again, the ubiquity of your content, making it very easy to access, to discover, and then to stream it at high quality are all keys to success, even for, you know, these small providers as they're going up against the bigger ones in the market.
It's the relevance of the offering more than the channel of the media that is important. You know, we have seen very good examples of community-based platforms, of very specific type of content that are on specific platforms, and these, if they have a proper marketing, can really succeed. And I would say on this kind of content, Netflix and Amazon are not competitors, because they don't have the kind of catalogs that the subscribers are looking for in this specific context.
This crisis has driven increased consumption of OTT services. Now, for some media companies, this was not the first or most important means of distribution. Have you seen a significant migration of budgets to OTT? And if yes, in which part of the OTT stack?
We've had such a variety of partners reaching out to us. Live linear playout partners that are streaming live linear content that want to put call to actions in lower thirds. So we're seeing them use Singular right on their transcode stack. We're seeing some clients using artificial intelligence to make highlight reels and take the data and strip it with the time code to make custom highlight reels, all using AI with overlays. Red Bull just recently used some of these interactive overlays to do voting and polling on their Red Bull Rampage event. And lastly, a major esporting client of ours used Singular to create a fully engaging experience. So, Mervyn, answer to your question, there is a lot of opportunities for people to create more engaging experiences in this OTT stack. Once they have the production methodologies in place to create and distribute their content, they have to ask, well, now how do we truly engage our audience? And that's where we come in.
There as well, I would say that the migration of budgets to OTT, and OTT is actually sometimes misused, but it's everything related to delivery over the, I would say, over the internet, and it's linear and non-linear. So it's because people tend to think only on demand, but it's also the linear streams. So that is ongoing also for several years. And of course, most companies, when they start in this area, they will always focus on the front end part first, because that's what the consumers, that's what the viewers actually see. And so investment goes into the front end part first. But visionary companies understand, of course, that if you want to organize your front end part, especially in nowadays world where you have lots of platforms, lots of different media formats, lots of complexity in rights, that if you don't organize your backend, you won't be able to deliver at scale, to deliver efficiently. And as referring to your first question about pennies, if you don't, if the revenue side is not that high, you have to make sure that the cost side is as low as possible. And it's really by having an efficient content supply chain operation that you can achieve also delivery of video at the lowest cost as possible. And actually, if you really go to the extreme, it means automating as much as possible let's say the back office part, so the content supply chain. Try to automate it as much as possible. And actually, you could even call this then a kind of touchless operation or a process. Touchless meaning, yeah, you don't need much human. And once you got, of course, a fully automated or fully touchless process, then you can scale without at computer cost, which is, of course, we know that the cost of computers is low compared to the human cost.
I don't know if we've seen the pandemic play a transformational role in the marketplace. So I really see it as an accelerant into things that were already happening, right? We have predicted, you know, a consumption of content on OTT to grow over, you know, a 5-year period, and where we expect it to be in 2022 is where we are today. So what that means for our customers is not a transformation of their business. It's not a rethinking of what's happening. It's accelerating the investments they were already making. We had already seen a decline or flattening of pay TV subscriptions. We had already seen kind of a flattening or decline of television advertising revenue. And, you know, during this pandemic, we're seeing more than ever that consumers want to get their content over the top on their mobile devices and on connected TVs. So in terms of migration of budgets, you know, we're seeing continued investment in distribution of content to OTT. We're starting to see some acceleration of investment in content specifically created and contributed for OTT. And if anything, you know, we're seeing an increased investment in the OTT viewing experience. How can we leverage, again, some of these digital assets and digital formats to do innovative things with the viewing experience, say social watching, or, you know, giving more control to the viewers and allowing them to select angles for their cricket match rather than just watching the primary broadcast feed. You know, these kinds of innovations have also been accelerated due to the crisis. And, you know, I, for one, am very excited to see where this innovation goes over the next couple of years.
It's the issue is really how you monetize the content catalog. And so the issue with OTT is that it's a lot of investments with a monetization that is still to be proven for a majority of players. And so I would not say that in this time of uncertainty, there are more investments in OTT, because I think it's the platform that performs today are just the results of investments from the past, you know, and it's also some kind of luck that there is an increase in usage. But we will have to have a look later at the revenues that have been induced or created by this increased usage, because sometimes, you know, paywalls have been lowered, and the effect on revenue has not been very important. So we haven't seen this increase in OTT technology spending.
Have you noticed the focus on data and audiences increasing or decreasing from media companies as a result of this crisis? Which areas have your customers focused on when it comes to this?
We've seen an increase of the need for good data for business intelligence. It's not the traditional ad tech where you're trying to do targeted sponsors, but for business intelligence, really understanding whether the experiences are meaningful to the end users. So using the example I just mentioned for this large e-gaming event, we were able to report back were the player cams engaged, did people use them? And we can tell if people went to them and see how many times they were used and what players they clicked on. We were able to see not only that they used the feature, but who they clicked on, what was their favorite player. In the e-commerce sections, we were able to tie in, did they get an impression? Did they engage with it? And did they transact? So getting the information to make meaningful decisions about what type of content they're creating moving forward, not just the ad tech. In fact, that's not an area we focus on. We tie in with ad tech partners, but getting true actionable business intelligence that we can give the content creators back so they know where to focus their efforts and what capabilities or features are more relevant for their audience. So yes, we've seen a big need for data and information, but it's a different type. It's validation and justification for the content they're creating and making sure that content is resonating with their end viewers.
Definitely increasing, and as I said, already pre-COVID time actually. So the awareness is there now a couple of years, but maybe not always turned into action. And now I think media companies are turning it into action. It's really understanding, so know your customer, understanding the audience, the different segments of the audience, and translate that understanding into let's say several components. One, of course, is the recommendation components. So can we personalize content delivery to every viewer? That's one thing, but at the same time, it also helps them to understand what kind of content they need to acquire or produce or commission. And of course, what kind of content, if they have this in their inventory, what kind of content is content that can be sold, actually, because if you own some content, you can also monetize or consider monetization through selling, let's say, format and content that had a good rating or a good fanship.
Yeah, data has never been more important than it is today. When we talked about the importance of understanding your audience and understanding which content is performing well, it's the underlying data in an OTT platform which reveals those insights to operators. So as always, data is a big focus for most of the OTT service providers. An interesting area where we're starting to see data emerge is in the advertising arena as well. So in a traditional kind of pay TV environment, you're limited to performance metrics based on ratings or very broad-based metrics, because that's all you can really measure. But in the world of OTT, we can get very fine-grained in terms of which devices, which consumers, beyond the household level, we can start to understand viewer preferences, even around advertising, and use that to tailor the advertising experience for more of a personalized experience. And as a result, we can also see longer viewing durations. We can see more ads being consumed, and then again, kind of tailor your not only what your ad creatives are, but also your advertising partners and underlying ad technology stacks to really optimize the revenue and kind of make those margins a little less thin in the advertising business. So I can't stress enough how important collecting and aggregating and analyzing data is to make your OTT service successful.
Yeah, as I was saying, bringing facts to the table, bringing data, looking at the situation with cold blood is extremely important, And so we have seen an increase in demand, especially because a lot of our business was running on experience. And when a crisis like this, that is unprecedented, when a crisis like this hits, it's difficult to rely on past experience. And so I would say that really data is gaining in terms of influence in the business, in terms of importance in the strategic decisions. And it's especially in 4 areas. The first area is around customer acquisition, customer retention, upsell. How do I maximize my subscriber value? That's the first area. The second area is around content. How do I better acquire content? How do I better choose? How do I pay less for my content? But also, how do I recommend it better to subscribers to make sure that every piece of content that I own is properly used and monetized? The third aspect is really around the network and the quality of the experience of the subscribers to quickly diagnose any issue on the network, and why not link it with the marketing to make sure that you can call or SMS the people that have an issue and to increase the customer satisfaction. And the fourth area is, as we were talking, the targeted advertising, really to make sure that I am, as an operator, able to offer a view on my audiences that is micro-segmented, and also that I can price my slots dynamically in this period. That's extremely important. So those 4 pillars of subscriber value, content, quality of experience, and advertising are really key when it comes to the use of data in the strategic decisions.
I'd like to thank you all for joining us at this session today, and I hope that you have managed to take away some interesting insights. As I mentioned at the start of the session, there is a wealth of information on the IABM website that covers many of the topics discussed today, and I'd urge you to take a look at www.theiabm.org. Thank you.